Automation is quickly evolving from an IT project to a business objective. Leaders recognize the power of automation to drive efficiency, improve customer and employee experience, to surface more accurate data and improve business processes. Put simply, automation is about the reduction of human input. And although any organization can quickly come up with a long list of automation candidates, this is the kind of list that can overwhelm the best laid plans. In my experience, many technical folks are motivated by efficiency. They quickly identify wasteful processes and figure out how to make things faster or smoother. It's just in their nature. And these are the people that you want to find and reward in some way, as they may form the very first items on your easy wins list. You see, employees working at the grassroots level have the best viewpoint for identifying odd workflows and other lucrative candidates. Now, this won't be as simple as I'm making it sound. There is no automation business unit to query for this stuff. It's hard to know the full degree to which automation may already be happening, which is why today's show centers on Priority 3 of the Automation Priorities for 2023 Research Report, Scale Grassroots Efforts. We have two experts guiding us for this one, Danny Callear, a DevOps and Automation Architect for WWT, and Dave O'Toole, who is Senior Director of Product Management, also Worldwide Technology. Both are amazing. We'll meet them shortly, but I do want to highlight the unique perspective that Dave brings to this particular topic. So Dave has been with Worldwide for almost 2 decades, perhaps over 2 decades. Much of that time has centered on supply chain activities. Now, in case you don't know, Worldwide has an impressive global operation providing logistics and staging services and more for their global clientele. Now, the article Evolving Supply Chain Operations with Automation is linked below, and it takes you into their 2019 Business Process Improvement, or BPI, initiative, where supply chain operations are, of course, mostly affected. As Director of Supply Chain Operations, Dave was instrumental in this company-wide BPI team, and he shares a bit of the backstory on a few of their wins and the results that they achieved. Automation adds value to both large and minor tasks. Still, the real benefits come from a company-wide strategy that provides these programs with the necessary support and visibility to scale meaningful organizational benefits. Harnessing the value of finding, proofing, and encouraging grassroots efforts already in motion can prove very rewarding. And that is what we're talking about in depth next. My name is Rob Boyd. Welcome to WWT Reports Research, accelerating results through the knowledge and achievements of those who came before us. Well, guys, welcome. So glad you could take the time to join us. I want to cover some introductions if we could. Let's start with Dana. Do you mind telling us, what do you do for Worldwide Technology and anything helpful as it pertains to today's topic? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Danny Callear. I am on our Global Solutions and Architectures team as a technical solutions architect. And my focus is on basically being a technical conduit between all of the folks in Worldwide's field, all of our OEMs and partners, and then of course directly with our customers. So I'm here to make sure that things flow, answer questions, try out new products, see how things actually tick, and field all of those various different conversations in the automation space.
Well, and your title has both automation and DevOps, so you're certainly not short of things to work on, it sounds like. And that's
it's a large topic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I bet they overlap a lot. A lot of things really play into each other, so you're never going to be free from any one thing. Well, excellent. Glad to have you here. Dave,
thank you.
First time we've had a chance to work together. I'm curious if you don't mind telling us, what do you do for Worldwide and how long you've been doing it, and anything else that would be important?
David O'Toole, Senior Director of Product Management, is the simple way to describe it. I've been here for about 24 years in a myriad of different roles, heavily around the supply chain. And we've definitely taken a lot of advantage of automation in the supply chain, both on the business side as well as on the IT side. And that's really my passion is, how do you use technology to make things more efficient, more scalable? Hopefully we'll get into a number of examples and of how we've applied it here worldwide.
Our focus here is on Priority 3 in the Automation Priorities Report, which is about grassroots automation. And it just strikes me, because we did another show, the only other show we've done so far on these automation priorities was one that talked about number 1, which is a top-down strategy. And it feels like at first glance that these might be at odds. Do you mind defining grassroots as it pertains to automation, and how globally you would say this is important to understand?
I think one of the interesting things about this particular report is it's probably more of like a series of observations, right? So we've seen anytime that we've interacted with a lot of customers, we've seen lots of pockets of automation, right? We'll see folks that are working on automating things to make their own jobs easier, and really that's what we define as grassroots. It's the things that are already taking place, and we don't want to squash those things. We want to really kind of the opposite. We want to encourage and foster those things, and take advantage of those skill sets and those desires to automate, and put some emphasis behind them, for lack of a better description. So the idea is to take those individual efforts and start combining them together, add them together into something larger than they already are, and expand it from the individual to that individual's team, and then to the organization, and eventually to the enterprise. And that's really the idea, is to find that starting point. We call it landing the plane.
Yeah.
Find that starting point and expand out from that starting point. And we found that to be the most successful way of expanding automation, because as you mentioned earlier, it's a very large topic. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of moving parts.
So I like the recognition of the fact that that people are going to approach it at various levels. Automation can mean a lot of different things to different people. And the idea, though, is to say, you wouldn't want to tackle an enterprise-wide automation plan, I would imagine, without perhaps taking into account things that have already happened, because there could be ways to save time, process, reward people for great work, identify champions and people who are enthusiastic about this kind of stuff, and give them the resources, assuming that what they're doing, broadly pertains to the objectives and the goals, which of course is what you want to do. Dave, did you have any thoughts on this as well before we move on?
Yeah, as I was listening to Dana, one of the things that struck me was sometimes it even comes from a technology. There's a new technology, that's out there. But it all starts grassroots. You've got to find some way to prove it out, and I think that's one of the things that we've done here at Worldwide, is taken, this technology, whether it's machine learning or robotic process automation or other things, and identified a real business case to try out the technology. And then from there, as Dana described, how do you then build the momentum to grow that grassroots and expand it beyond, just the one or two use cases that you might try it out on?
Well, I like that too, because isn't it always the case? It feels like we're all employees at different levels. We all report to somebody and we're all involved and responsible for something. And often that, by very definition, we are going to be the first ones, people who are in those roles, saying, wait, there's an easier way to do my job. It always feels like there's a clarity of how things really get done when you're at an employee level versus maybe a senior leadership level. And so you're in a good place, and I like the recognition that you guys place on that in terms of saying, well, here's where a lot of the great knowledge is going to come from. But how do we harness it, and how do we move that forward? So I'll use that as a segue point, Dave. We hinted at this earlier. There's a great article. We have it linked below here in terms of titled "Evolving Supply Chain Operations with Automation." Can you talk a little bit about what that project? You're quoted heavily in this, and we're going to reference a couple of those. Can you set this up for us? What is this article about, and what does it represent in terms of what you've accomplished and the teams you work with?
Yeah, I mean, essentially what the effort was really to take a moment to step back and rethink our supply chain. As we've had tremendous success up till now, it's really thinking about what the future of our supply chain needs to be, and really challenging ourselves with the patterns that we need to solve to meet the needs of today and tomorrow versus the needs of yesterday. And within that effort, there's going to be some big initiatives that come out of it, but there's also some smaller initiatives. And one of the things that was very important to me and the rest of the team was, how do you build momentum? And that's really when I think about grassroots, it's really about that building of momentum. So how do you not try to solve the big things and wait for the big things, but how do you incrementally identify where you can build that momentum? And that's really a lot of what we've seen through that effort, is finding that balance of large initiatives, but making sure that we have a steady stream of smaller initiatives that build the momentum, leveraging different automation capabilities that we have.
You guys revealed some duplication of efforts that seems to be a common theme here when we start pulling stuff and shedding some light on what different individuals may be doing in different areas.
and suddenly you realize there may be some easy wins found in that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we actually brought together 50 to 60, individuals to understand how they were solving their own problems and meeting the needs of our customers. And that's really where we discovered there were many of the same patterns, but they were being solved in multiple ways. And so, one, we want to celebrate, that they were looking for the most efficient way to do, their tasks and create the best experience for the customer. At the same time, we wanted to harness that to look for a more enterprise approach to solving those patterns consistently across the board.
Yeah. Dana, I'm curious, have you seen this notion of finding duplicate efforts as being an easy win with clients and various projects you've been associated with?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's, not necessarily unique to automation, but definitely very prevalent in it is that you'll have processes that span multiple different teams, right? So take the process of delivering an application or updating an application. It goes all the way from developers through integration teams to QA and testing. There's an artifacts phase where we talk about dependencies and updating those, think like databases and things like that. And then you actually go into the actual deployment and then automate the process by which the application is actually put into an environment that it can be used. And in most cases, those are all separate teams.
Yeah.
Right. And so kind of when you get into the mindset of automation, it's not only how do we automate each of those individual phases, but how do we connect them to each other as well? And so the grassroots piece of it is very interesting from the perspective of analyzing and looking at how each of those individual teams are automating their tasks for themselves. And then figuring out what is the connective tissue to bring them all together. So that a developer, for example, can say, push this code, I'm ready to push this code. And then it automatically gets into production without having to, involve any of those other different teams because all those automations are strung together.
Yeah.
So that process that David outlined of getting together and figuring out, bringing those people together and be like, all right, how does a business process across the whole business, how does that look end to end? And then taking those boxes and saying, all right, what pieces are automated individually? And then if we have those individual components, how do we actually tie them together? And what we find is that a lot of those teams may have already done with automation, just to make their own individual lives easier. And now what we're talking about is we take advantage of that work that's been done already and take those automations and string them together. So we have a long, business-wide, enterprise-wide automation process that we can take advantage of. So it's almost like taking the individual's automation efforts and kind of turning them around. So, if I write a piece of automation code for myself, I am the customer.
Yeah.
And somebody can ask me, hey, can you go do this thing? And I say yes. And I have the automation piece and it does it in seconds instead of minutes or hours. And we want to take that automation and kind of turn it around and make my actual customer the customer so they can use that automation and it benefits me directly. And so some of those just internal mind shift things that take place act as a catalyst in the flywheel, and people start seeing how this automation machine can really benefit them, and it tends to accelerate that process.
Dave, there was a point made in the paper talking about the importance of using data to prioritize what to work on first, and you guys had some kind of, not contrarian perhaps, but you had some examples where you maybe the gut said, this is what we need to go do, but then the data told you that may not be the best way to do it. I'm hoping you remember what I'm referring to, and maybe you can shed some more light on it because I thought it was interesting.
We really were asking the question, what does the data actually tell us? Because we wanted to stack the wins, right? We wanted to stack value. And so we wanted to make sure that, with the changes on the business side as well as the IT side, they matched with the value. And so, we went into a hyper focus to say, hey, I hear what you're saying. Now let's go justify that. Take a short period of time. We don't want to overanalyze it, but enough information that says, hey, this is worth going after, or let the data tell us it really isn't. Let's go parking lot that. Maybe that goes lower in priority, or we choose not to do it because the data tells us to actually go automate something different, usually in the same, in the same process, but it may not be exactly what they thought we wanted to automate when we first engaged in the conversation.
Well, and I don't want to turn this entire thing into, a show about the paper that was written in the supply chain, although there are some very good examples that I encourage everybody to download this paper, take a look at it. One of which was, I just called it out simply because it was, you say this in there, it's the little things. And it was this shift in data processing for time savings. And I wanted to highlight this one because sometimes we get carried away and we want to prioritize the big things with the big wins, but there's so many good things that can happen at a smaller level that may make a huge difference. It says in the article, it turned out that team members were in fact spending an average of 2 minutes waiting for a label to print. Doesn't sound like a big deal. The problem was that data processing was occurring on the label server, which was fine 15 years ago when the data was easier to process, but the label server could no longer keep up with the complexity that had kind of grown around it. And it seems so odd and so small, but how did you guys find something like that and begin to say, this is something we need to work on?
It's this one was an interesting one because typically when requests come into IT, there's almost a presumed solution that the business is asking for. But we really flip the tables and instead
like you have
of
a
asking
solution in
for
search of
what
an
to
answer
solve,
or a solution in search of a problem kind of thing?
yeah, correct. Instead we were asking questions about what is causing the most frustration amongst your team members. What are the challenges that they're seeing? If they could eliminate, one thing or two things, to make their lives easier, in the jobs and the tasks that they need to do, what would those be? So we really took it away from talking about the technology to really expose where are there real challenges and frustrations and pain points throughout the process. And that's when, somebody said, hey, it's taken way too long to sit there and wait for labels. And we did a quick time study, over just a couple of days. And sure enough, that was something that needed to get resolved to improve a couple of things. One, the speed for us to actually receive product into inventory so that we can use it. But two, really the employee experience. And three, ultimately the customer experience. So it was really changing the way we ask questions to really understand what the frustrations at a person level were, so that we can go resolve something that was truly meaningful to them.
What is the importance of culture and just setting it up so that you're kind of automation positive and everybody understands this is what we're driving for?
Yeah. So culture is the core of everything for all of this, in my opinion. It can't be emphasized enough, and it can't be minimized and be successful. So I think it's the most important piece of the entire operation. And I think that's, it's one of those situations where we focus on getting that internal win. And so when we have the ability to have the employees see something that they've made positively affect not only their team, but others that are they're surrounding them, especially their customers, it tends to act as a flywheel.
Yeah.
And that's really at the end of the day, that's what we focus on. How do we get that specific internal win, so that the light bulbs go off and everyone's like, oh, now I get it.
Yeah.
Now I want to do this. And so there are a lot of different catalysts to, get those things moving forward. If we have the ability, to focus on that top down piece and we get the investment in terms of time of those teams, which is sometimes a very large challenge because a lot of things are constantly on fire. And so they may not have the cycles, but if we get the time to get all those teams together and have them talk very openly amongst each other about the process end to end, and go through what we call a value stream mapping process to actually identify the processes and who touches it and all the existing automations and all the existing manual steps and things like that. That tends to be a very good experience from a culture perspective because it just lays everything out on the table.
Yeah.
Right. We can see all the various different pieces. And when we do our automation as a service engagements and our very large programs, we always start with gathering as much information as we possibly can. Alternatively, it could be a situation where somebody, we're working with an individual team and we just focus on what influence do we have. Yeah. And it could be something as simple as we've already automated this stuff for ourselves. Now, how do we automate the interfaces? So in other words, How do we automate so that people can give us stuff easier? And how do we automate so that other people can take the things that we do better? Right. So the teams that are working with us as the inputs and the teams that we're providing things to as the outputs, automate those pieces, because that is a handoff, right? Human to human.
Well, it's funny. You kind of this almost sounds like a security implementation, in that security is never a project that you're going to finish. Oh, we did that last year.
Oh, absolutely.
Automation's really that same way too, because I don't picture you never finish, you just get better at it, and you constantly, because it's a moving target, I imagine you're always looking for new things to improve upon.
I'll say that this is very much an asymptotic relationship, right? If you were talking about a maturity curve, 5 is there, but you're just, that's something that you're aspirationally shooting for. You might not actually ever get there, and that's one of those situations where you don't actually want to get to 5. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but you want to continuously be improving yourself. That's the mindset you need to be in. There's always some way to make ourselves better. And there's always some way that we can use automation to improve the business. And the thing I was going to say earlier around, something that's not very typical from a cultural perspective is there's a lot of places where automation isn't usually thought of as a default or as a way to approach it. For example, when we're talking about DevOps, it's usually pigeonholed with writing applications. But you can use the same exact methodologies, and in fact, you should, in my opinion, use the same methodologies for automating infrastructure, right? So you have folks writing code to automate the infrastructure, have that code traverse the same types of pipelines, test it, secure it, things like that, and put it into a centralized platform that others can consume. That's the best way to go about doing it, and it's not something that is typically associated with automating of infrastructure. It's usually pigeonholed into application development.
Which would rob you of the ability to make things get easier as you scale. So starting with automation from the get-go, as opposed to thinking, okay, that's going to be something I'll approach once I figure all this other stuff out, then I don't know. It just sounds like it's going to be a slower ramp up.
It can be, but when you get that first flywheel, that first light bulb going off, it really accelerates it. We've seen that over and over and over again. And even if you get into a situation where there's naysayers or there's the people that have concerns about their jobs or anything along those lines, when they see the power of what they're trying to accomplish, it quickly turns into a situation where it's business agility and customer employee satisfaction.
Once you get a team that embraces it, it really just becomes the core of how they think about things, right? Now there's a challenge to always get there, because there's a lot of pride in the way people do their tasks today. But when they can see how automation can actually, elevate their own career growth and development and, higher value tasks, it becomes that flywheel, that momentum, that accelerator, even at an employee level.
Well, I love the example that you guys are using with a flywheel, because as I've worked on some power smoothing situations with flywheels in the data center, and just the notion of you get that thing moving, and then the whole idea is that there's a momentum there that makes everything smoother and allows things to happen in a much easier basis. But sometimes getting a big wheel started in motion is difficult. Dave, you went through, I think you said 50, 60 people, all from disparate groups that had some level of input that were going to be needed, or otherwise, you might be skipping over or missing an opportunity. And so you had to figure out, how do we bring these people together and get them to agree on the common goals and understand that this is an important use of their time versus, as we've acknowledged, there's going to be other fires burning all the time.
Yeah. And that's where the top down comes in, right? To pull everybody together in that fashion, there had to be a catalyst from the top down. Once we were together, then it really became, how do we look for those small wins so that we can, get that flywheel moving.
Well, perfect. Guys, as we wrap up, I want to make sure that anybody watching this that might have an interest in pursuing this further, but may not feel completely capable of taking this on themselves, maybe not even sure, because I think this is my situation a lot, where I'm not exactly sure how much I want to use maybe your help, but I certainly want to learn more about what you could do to help me on this. Assuming that's possible, but Dave, tell me, what do you recommend for next steps, and what do you see as a positive way for people to approach this going forward?
I think some of it is just having the open mind. I think in general, there are a lot of opportunities for automation. And one, don't don't be afraid of the number of options that are out there, but really get back to what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
And then how can you leverage the technology, and the automation in order to solve that? So to me, it's always around what business problem or goal are you trying to achieve? And then from there, what are the options? Because if you don't start there, automation or any project will not go very far. So just get really clear with what problems need to be solved, and then be open to the possibilities of solving them in new ways.
Yeah, perfect. Dana, what are your final thoughts?
If folks sit back, like literally just sit back and think about where they fall. If we're talking about grassroots, we're at the right at the individual contributor, right down in the weeds with everything, and they think about where they fall in the grand scheme of things. Right? What cog in the machine are they?
Yeah.
And how can they meaningfully contribute to making that piece of the machine the most efficient thing possible? And it's always going to involve working with other teams that surround them. So, they're going to mesh with gears that they surround in that machine. And so making those interfaces as efficient as possible, not only for the individual themselves or the individual team, but the teams that they work with, that's a huge piece of it. And it helps with the cultural aspect because you're working more closely with the teams that surround you.
Yeah.
And it really just adds on itself. It compounds and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So, the David mentioned the top down piece. If we have that capability to express why it's so important, and really focus on emphasizing that these processes are business wide, they touch everyone, right? And you are a part of a very important process and a very important machine for our company. That's how we make money. If people just change that mindset, again, cultural, it really helps them understand what they can do from a business perspective to automate those processes. You mentioned earlier security. That's a great example. Automation and security are both overlays.
Yeah.
So my mantra there is, how can you meaningfully contribute to both of them? Because ultimately everyone is responsible for both of those things.
Well, and from a security perspective, some of the things that I know we've talked about in other shows is the notion of automation becomes a way to also make sure that once you've nailed a process down, that it's done repeatedly in the right manner, it's done correctly. You've got good data sources and you're executing them in the right way versus the human interface where we all, are prone to make mistakes for whatever reason.
Exactly.
Not intentional.
We're all human.
But yeah, let's take those things away and let the machines do what machines are good at, which is repetitive actions. But I got to hand it to you. You guys surprised me with something because I didn't think about this going this direction in this conversation. We've done other shows on the customer experience. And I don't think automation doesn't even need to say, hey, it's a pro for customer experience to be worthwhile to chase. Because I think automation has a lot of very demonstrable measures of success that you can latch onto. But boy, what a great way to, so many companies that I've worked with where there's siloed departments that just don't understand how they work with someone else, what their relationship is, and it affects their outlook on life and their career and which is going to affect their productivity. Here is a way in an automation, enterprise-wide automation type effort, it feels like becomes almost an excuse to say, let's expose each other to what's doing, because you're going to have to do that, as you both have mentioned, to be successful in identifying the things that could be done more efficiently, and then nominating the right ones to do first for machine, kind of that machine repetition.
100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for taking the time out today. Fascinating stuff, a lot to cover. I encourage everybody to, of course, download the paper, maybe perhaps even follow you guys on the platform as well, as you continue to produce good information for us all to learn from. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
WWT research papers are organized into recurring sections that make them simpler to read. There's no need to figure out the framework each time. I love that. Well, today's priority focus on scaling grassroots efforts listed 3 important steps that serve as a good recap. Number 1, identify pockets of automation. We talked a lot about this, as these have the potential to identify good stuff already happening. Plus, you don't want to accidentally overlap or leave this out of the strategy. Now, this includes SaaS solutions, networking, storage, security, as well as some BUs that may be asking IT for custom automation. I guarantee that's happening. Well, we also talked about the importance of fostering the right environment for success, which brings us to step 2, create a blameless culture. Automation necessitates collaboration among numerous teams, as well as a high level of experimentation. Employees may be hesitant to stretch new automation muscles for fear of disrupting a process and then being singled out. But it makes no difference who's to blame for a glitch. Finding a solution is everyone's job. Because as you implement automation, mistakes are going to be made, so accept them. These can lead to very important learning. The third and final step outlined in the research report will help foster these first two for sure. Make work visible. Too often, employees don't share what they know. Kanban and agile methods can help team members know what each person is working on and let them work together to solve problems. At the same time, IT managers must set up an agile cadence with business unit partners to show their work and get quick feedback on whether automation efforts really are targeting and meeting business goals. Remember that today's show is a deep look into one of 5 priorities around automation. You can find all of them in the report itself, which is linked below. And on these others, well, we've got more shows coming soon. Worldwide has more to offer than we can discuss in a single show. Explore what you can do on their site, which is the same one that you're using to watch this. They call it the platform. Mark things that you want to hear more about, read articles, follow these presenters. Let us know what we can do to help. Certainly let them know what they can do to help. Everybody is here to make things easier. My name is Rob Boyd. Thank you so much for watching.